Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a super session all about implementing reading strategies across the school. You guys are in for a treat. We've got Alice here today who has done you the most amazing presentation. I've just had a look at it, and you are going to need a pen and paper because you're going to get so many great ideas and lots of opportunities for reflection too. And Alice, you've chosen the best day for me because today is the BBC's 500 words competition final announcement. So today on the TV, on the One Show tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to find out who's won the final stories. So, and that's all about reading and the love of stories. So it's a good day for me personally because I was there and I watched the final in Buckingham Palace, but also a great day for you guys because you're going to hear all about great reading strategies. And we were saying we could do this for a whole day, let alone a short session for about an hour. We could talk about reading all day, couldn't we, Alice?
I definitely could. And it is also World Book Day today, so that's another nice
World Book Day today. Yes, it is definitely World Book Day today. So yeah, if you're interested, take a look at World Book Day, National Literacy Strategy, the Beano, Head Teacher Chat. We've all helped the BBC help them with their writing competition. So if you're interested, have a look at, because the stuff that all the partners have done together is superb. And today we're going to hear all about how to implement reading strategies across the school. It's such a big task, isn't it, Alice? And when you're in charge of reading, it's often overwhelming. You know, you've got the whole school to worry about. You know, I'm sure you're going to give us some great tips today.
Yeah, it's a massive area of expertise that you need to build a reading curriculum. So hopefully this will help with some kind of key knowledge, but also strategies for implementing it effectively.
Amazing. Thank you, Alice. And I know you've been a teacher for a long time. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be here?
Yeah, so I work as a literacy consultant with One Education. So we support teachers and leaders to provide best practice from HR to curriculum development. And my role is sort of supporting schools through providing expertise and training and leadership development, particularly in literacy, but we also work with the wider educational development team. Before this, I was a teacher in a couple of primary schools for nearly 20 years. I also worked alongside a national leader of education to deliver support as an SLE in various schools, and did sort of a lot of training in the borough that I worked in. So I'm really interested in research and development, and this is how I kind of became a bit more of an expert and got into this role, which I'm absolutely loving.
Oh, well, it's lovely to have you here, and thank you so much. It's going to be great to have all of your expertise, and I'm sure, you know, we could do more sessions after this, so please watch the space. I'm sure I'll be able to convince Alice to come back and do some follow-ups because, as I said, we talk about reading all day, and there's so much to cover. So I shall let you be. I'll put your PowerPoint up for you so you're ready, and if you guys have any questions at all, please reach out. You can contact myself, Lucy, or you can. I'll put Alice's details on how to contact Alice too. So if you've got any questions directly for Alice, you know, feel free to reach out. That's exactly what we love, don't we, Alice? We like questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Busy and out of trouble. So please put those questions out there, and we hope you enjoy this session. Thank you so much. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about implementing reading strategies across the school. It is such a complicated task to put an effective reading curriculum in place, like I mentioned before. So we're going to talk about what are these key reading strategies, the progression that you need to know that goes through school, and how we implement those in terms of our teaching and learning. And we're going to cover these essential reading ingredients, and how we could use a reading strategy bank and this kind of monitoring and evaluating impact as we get through toward the end of the session. So we're going to go sort of in three parts. My first part is about sort of planning and that kind of background knowledge that I've mentioned, and what are these key reading strategies, and what, you know, how are the strands of reading linked to the different domains and the curriculum. Some of the key strategies that I'm just going to focus on, and how these link to developing also metacognitive skills as a reader, and that really important progression through school. So I'm not going to spend lots of time on research, but all of our learning at One Education is based on research, and we champion that evidence-led approach in schools. But this Hollis-Garber's reading rate is the key model for understanding the complexity of the reading process, and it is absolutely an enormous cognitive task to be a reader. In case you aren't familiar with it, the reading rate consists of the lower and upper strands, and we have that sort of the word recognition strands, that phonological awareness, decoding and sight recognition of familiar words, and these work together as the reader becomes more accurate and fluent and increasingly automatic with repetition and practice, and then concurrently at the language comprehension strands, the background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. They reinforce one another and then weave together with this word recognition strands to produce that skilled reader. And it's a lovely analogy to see that the tighter that the rope bonds, the more efficient you are and skilled as a reader. But obviously, to mention, this doesn't happen overnight. It requires a lot of instruction and practice over time. But this is really relevant for what we're talking about today, in terms of needing to know how reading works as a reading leader. So one thing that would be really valuable is to spend time looking at that research, and particularly the reading rate, with your staff, and then moving on to kind of what are these key comprehension strategies that we want to cover. So at One Education, we've created something called the Reading Gems, and these cover all of the reading strategies that children need to learn to master reading. We have a wealth of resources you can access, and I think we're going to attach some to this video, but we have free blogs, and we have lots of resources that you can get to, sentence stems, for example, that I'm showing you here, planning and so on. And today I've just selected what we would consider as these kind of essential reading strategies of retrieving, inference, prediction, and summarising. But it's important to note that simply focusing on developing key reading skills alone will not make a child a reader, especially if they're taught in isolation and applied to the best test type questions, if you like, or perhaps just a different extract each lesson. We need this kind of varied reading diet, and pupils need the opportunity to embed these certain strategies and before they can confidently apply other ones. So, for example, if you want to be able to make a reasonable prediction, they also need to be able to retrieve information. The prediction also requires the reader to infer, and in order to extend predictions further, children would need to be able to deduce using evidence and reasoning. So, like we said, a very complicated strategy. And then this shows our sort of Reading Gems skills ladders, and these support children's metacognitive skills when responding to texts. And we think about the progression of technique that they need to master before they can be fluent or skilled in that strategy. And really, to teach this effectively, it's also for the staff. The staff need that vital knowledge for reading that's highly developed, so that teachers can identify the skills and strategies that the children may need support with. And we also have other resources like the Reading Gems overviews, which give a detailed breakdown as to what the skill is and the strategies used to integrate these into lessons. And these sorts of resources and technique that is in place across the school that shows that progression, but also cohesion across different phases and year groups, is really, really important to support the children in their development effectively. So we're just going to look at a few of these because they link to what I want to talk about a bit later on. So first of all, retrieval. So retrieval is often seen as the easiest of the reading skills. It involves just taking information directly from a text, but it's actually still complex to teach effectively, and having that good subject knowledge is crucial. So retrieval relies on secure understanding of information stated explicitly in the text. And the key to that successful retrieval is that the information required is always found in the text. So skimming and scanning are especially important skills, skimming to get the gist and scanning to locate specific information. And it's recommended that before pupils are asked to retrieve any information from a text, they've read it really thoroughly and have a general understanding. We know the pupils who lift information without that full comprehension. Here I've just put an example of the kinds of texts and awareness that you need when you're looking at multimodal texts. So these would cover create an extra layer of challenge for reading. And at the end of the primary focus, have more of a focus on multidisciplinary reading skills. And for this reading across the curriculum, it's really important to consider the challenges of the texts that are presented to the children with like a rich range of formats and layouts to support their development of knowledge. And you have to consider what skills do we require in particular subjects to access this information. Are they even able to navigate the page? Are they able to look at the different forms of layout and get the information from those? And how we address these strategies and how these that we teach the children and how these particularly lend themselves to that discipline, for example, evaluating or checking validity of sources is really important. So not taking for granted that children will be able to navigate all kinds of text. So a little summary of Retrieve across the school. We start from EYFS thinking about finding these details in images, looking for in year one, discussing significance of titles and just small nuances, and then building up through into key stage 2 of distinguishing between fact and opinion and explaining understanding of what they've read. And we have little activities I've put in here in bold, which are kind of tasks, strategies that you could do to practice these skills in a more fun and interdimensional way, if you like. So then I'm going to move on to deduction or inference and deduction. So obviously we have these two elements of it. So you're starting off by just making simple predictions, and then you kind of start interpreting character motives, reading between the lines, understanding things. And this can be done in some very interactive ways. A couple of examples I've put on there. And inference is all about creating meaning based on evidence from the text. You quite often see, police or detective related tasks in this because they are looking for clues in the text. And we want them to apply their own understanding and personal experience to draw those conclusions. And this is where wider reading is really important, that they can make those links across their own reading experiences, their own life experiences, and those connections to the wider world. And this has a really heavy weighting in the SATs tests. And it's probably the most relevant strategy for personal responses to text as well. Pictures and wordless picture books can be tremendous sources for inference, especially for younger children, because it can be one of the hardest reading skills to teach, because getting inference questions wrong can often come from this lack of prior knowledge. And it's important to create that rich environment that children aren't afraid to say and to make guesses, speak out about their own inferences, but also to take on the other people's ideas to get that clarity of viewpoint. So the dialogic classroom is really important for that. So, using pictures, a really good starting point, especially images that relate to children's own life experience. If we consider how inference of the text is a bit different, if I put this one up, Henry waved goodbye and ran through the gate. He dropped his bag, picked it up, put it over his shoulder and gave a sheepish grin to his dad before being swallowed up by the big oak doors. Now, without any sort of image or video clip associated with the text there's different inferences you could come up with. And having a discussion about that would mean that different people could put their own thoughts in, and you could then consider that other viewpoints apart from your own might be valid. So we don't know whether Henry is quite accident prone or he had something precious in his bag and that's why he gave the sheepish grin. Do we understand the word sheepish and what influence that might have? And maybe it's related to this relationship between him and Dad. But then the word swallowed up almost seems like it's a little bit of a daunting prospect that he's going into this building. So what is the building and what might be happening? So there's another layer of inference that you could put onto that if you wanted to. So let's have a quick look through infer in a progressive sense, that we can start with the younger children thinking about identifying a character's feelings, but in relation to their own. So that's that first starting off point. And then making these inferences based on what's been said and done. So you could do an activity like, oh, what 3 wishes would your character like to have if they met a genie, and why would they do that? So that would be based on, you know, what kind of interest that character might have and things that they've done in the past. And then in years 3 to 6, we would be looking at inferences such as inferring the feelings and motives for their actions. So you might do an activity where you give children statements about a text and they have to prove whether they're true or false by finding evidence in the text. Perhaps they might think, oh, what would this character's bedroom look like? What would be on their Christmas list? You could perhaps develop feelings graphs to sort of show, as the sequence of events took place, how that character reacted and why. And an emotional roller coaster is a similar task to that. And then when we get further up into upper key stage 2, we want to see that children are being able to give these reasoned justifications. So all of that prior learning and that dialogic discussion and listening to other people's ideas is going to be building that experience, and perhaps experiences that children won't get out of school or won't get in their own reading lives. And it's really, really important part of the lessons that we use to teach this strategy. So I've just put prediction in here. Prediction is this type of inference, so it overlaps a little bit. And we might do things like using pictures, a little bit along the lines of what we've just talked about, and justifying these predictions. But the predictions can work really well if we think about before, during and after reading. So we have to kind of use predictions which are kind of authorised by the text and consider the subject, structure and genre. And it's really, again, based on that teacher-pupil dialogue in reading lessons. Simple questions such as, like, why do you think this, encourages the children to justify their predictions. And all children are expected to be able to make predictions whilst reading. That skill of prediction demands understanding of what's already happened. And then once they've got that understanding of the text, they'll be able to use their retrieval and inference skills in the process, and then they're better suited to make an accurate prediction. And as the children progress through the school, we'd like to see that they will be able to revise their predictions, considering more evidence that they're getting from being involved with the text. And we have this kind of idea, again, of this, the importance of that metacognition and the modelling of that comes from teaching the teacher. So, you know, I found this book and I think it might be about this. So I'm looking at the title. We often start our writing lessons that part of our format for writing is to have a predict session in there, so that when we're looking at a text, we automatically are engaging with it before we even know what it's about and putting our own ideas into play. And this, then whilst reading, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. What this makes me think this could happen. And then actually that wasn't at all what happened after reading. I realised that I was incorrect, or I was right about this, but I wasn't right about something else. And this is the kind of task we might do where we look at kind of through a narrow lens and then widen that lens, where we think, oh, what kind of book might this be about before we've even started reading it. And this is one way to kind of adjust predictions as well, just in a very simple way, and to introduce that to children, because you'll change your viewpoint of what you can see there as you get that wider lens. Again, using images and predicting, like, from what you know to relating that to what you don't know is really good, because you can make these assumptions, but you can also generate loads of questions, which you can then possibly answer later when you find out more about it. So using these kind of images, this is one from the New York Times that have a wonderful source of images in a weekly feature, what's going on in this picture. And that's something that looks quite unusual, but you can take hints from the picture and use it for a discussion point. It looks like some sort of race, but with waiters and waitresses there. So what's going on there? Is it in this country? And so on. But also it's really important to use both real and imaginary pictures. So examples from real books as well. And what kind of characters have we got there? How, what experiences have they had that maybe relate to this, and so on. We're going to talk a little bit about summarising. So summarising is a really important skill, but one of the harder ones, and it is about recalling those main points, but also a reader must first be able to sequence and retell a text, or using language that's related to that text. And that's the kind of skill that we start off with, and this is lower down the score on this bar at the top of the slide here. And we've got to just be able to think about what are those key events and start thinking about the order that things happen. And then this relates to very much to how the author has tried to control the text as well. So when the children become older, they recognise that they're kind of condensing this information together, they're pulling out main ideas and maybe particular points that the author's trying to make. And this requires a really good understanding of the content of the overall text first. And this is another reason why we really want children to read whole texts. It's really important to ask that question, could a child leave my school without having read a whole text? And if that answer could possibly be yes, then we need to be making sure that we are reading them. The teacher is reading them whole class texts, that they are working in groups or perhaps through lessons, because it would be a crying shame for that to happen. If the child has poor working memory or poor decoding, this can be quite a difficult skill, especially. And we find that children quite often put too much information in. So using kind of infographics is another way to simplify this. This is that first stage of sequencing, which links to summarising lower down the score. They could use make a 1-minute film version of a book, do a sort of image summary. They could act it out with kind of puppets. And you could say that, it is hard to do summarising in Key Stage 1 because it relies on demonstrating these other advanced sort of reading skills, including inference. But that book talk is really useful there to sort of stop and go over what's happened in the story so far and to break longer stories down for children. And when they are retelling a story or acting it out in their role play areas, they are summarising. That is exactly the skill we want to see. So obviously we have got this range in this particular strategy, and it's huge. So I've just popped on here a few activities and within the progression that I'll leave you to have a look at if you want to pause the video. But what we want to see is that variety that we've got. Different types of tasks, so like a seven word summary leading on to a 140 word tweet type summary. Doing a bit of drama and role play is also being able to understand exactly the sequence of events that happened and getting a character to retell those in a higher end of the score, just as importantly as they might do in the infants. And then lastly, in this section, I just wanted to mention those metacognitive strategies again. It's so important to encourage and develop this kind of self-monitoring for the children, so that when they are reading or when they are applying one of the strategies, that they recognise when something doesn't make sense, that they address kind of the phonic errors and make sense of homophones that they may have misinterpreted. And that they are always going back to an experience that they've had at school or in their own life or through another book or through the wider world that links to their understanding to deepen the breadth of the reading that they're getting. And when we go into Key Stage 2, we're thinking about teaching pupils to ask these questions, and so that they're thinking, I've got to make sure I clarify those unknown words. I'm not letting that go and assuming that keeping quiet, I don't know the meaning of something, and making sure that they really have got the understanding of what's happened up to that point as they go through a text, and how does it link to other texts and the rest of the text. And there's a well-known strategy which is for intervention to support children who struggle with these skills, which is the reciprocal reading intervention. It is advocated by EEF, and it is to keep these key strategies alongside kind of a group discussion where you can assign children different roles. It could be done whole class, but the children get to take on the role as a questioner, summariser and a clarifying predictor to really cement the importance of that metacognition. So at this point, I'm just going to leave you with an interactive question to have a think about. And how do you currently teach these reading strategies, and what is the impact? Do you feel that you've got that deeper understanding as a staff across what the strategies are, how they link together, and the development of them across the school? Do you staff understand the complexity of reading as a whole, and how it links to child development in reading before and after the stage that they're teaching within? I'm going to move on to my second section, which is thinking about the actual teaching and how a progressive approach to teaching reading strategies is implemented. And this is thinking about building upon previous learning, developing independence, engaging deeply with these texts over time, and having that structured, systematic and adaptable teaching model that evolves across different year groups. So when thinking about that, implementing that whole school reading strategy framework, we want to ensure that consistency in how reading's taught, obviously, and how strategies are developed. And our Reading Gems approach includes this sort of time for modelling the thought process that a skilled reader has to those who may not yet be as confident in making those links. And that is your role as teacher guider. And we obviously have these key focuses within each of the phases. So we want to develop that word recognition, decoding and fluency in the earlier years. We want to then move on to putting comprehension monitoring in place and these strategies to make links between texts. And then as children get toward the end of primary, working to develop those higher order thinking skills of analysis, evaluation, and definitely, most importantly, comparisons between texts. So this kind of would be implemented through, creating your reading progression map that outlines these expected skills. We have, a consistent teaching approach developed through CPD and shared planning, and obviously this really rich kind of reading spine of high quality texts in place that complement each other as well. And we really find it important to encourage these skills to be taught based on the needs of the children. So every school will look different. We want it to be linked to the context, the themes that you explore, the rest of the curriculum as well, to get that real depth of learning. So in EYFS, our focus is on retrieving information, really. We want to build that love of reading books. We want to make sure we start to question orally with the children, that we do this kind of modelled and interactive reading with them so that they understand about the meanings of words, how to find information, ordering events in a text, and making the inferences and predictions that we've talked about. So our Reading Gems approach is a way to teach reading across a school. Obviously, in every school, it looks different. We have it very much based on this I do, we do, you do approach, so that we are modelling explicitly and making the links throughout the process. And we would have just a 3-part structure to EYFS in year 1, which is teacher-led, and it considers the importance of building knowledge and making these links before reading, thinking about the pre-read section, to ensure that pupils are able to maximise their understanding, really focusing in on the vocabulary, but linking it to the context so it makes sense, and then spending a bit of time beginning to explore the reading gems, the strategies that we've talked about. And this could be through oral or shared discussions, and perhaps moving on to short written tasks. And we've seen it work really well in small groups, as well as whole class as well. And obviously this is always happening in addition to phonics. So it's a particularly focused reading session. And we have a progression that we sort of see across the school, that we have these strategies that evolve as the children move on, that we've talked about or touched upon. I'm just going to show you a little bit more detail here. That we would start with our focus in Key Stage 1 being really honed in on those key strategies. But then we have our developed reading gems for all of the emboldened strategies here, which we would then introduce as the children move up the school. So our Key Stage 2 structure is a lot more detailed, and we would advocate this rereading regularly to practice fluency and use of fluency techniques like choral reading, and fluency will aid that comprehension by reducing the cognitive load and bridging the word recognition and comprehension. And we know that all of the reading gems are linked together. So in our structure, once we address the reading gem strategy, we want to use that week so that we have this kind of rotation of skills that we work on. We would also spend time on the fourth session, perhaps revisiting more than one strategy. We could even have something that we call a treasure chest of gems, where they would look at lots of different types of questions, or an activity that involves developing different strategies through more practical techniques. And we would advocate that you obviously won't be using formal questioning all the time, that we have a variety of engaging activities within these sessions. And then we, alongside the DFE recommendations, and also the just importance of reading for pleasure, our fifth session is very much focused on enjoying reading and getting those wider reading experiences. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. It's not to say that we wouldn't necessarily use questioning. For example, this one here, we would want to stretch children by taking time to rehearse writing answers, refining these to sort of teach those skills in technique, because we know that they are having those assessments at the end of Key Stage 2, but this isn't exclusive, and we advise a range of tasks, obviously, that motivate that. But taking time to really address how to refine responses and challenge children to be sort of greater depth readers is really important. Our book club is very much focused on what we call TLC, the TLC of reading, and that is sort of text, exploring further texts, also exploring further focuses, maybe reading more of a text that you've started reading so you can delve deeper into the story structure or the content, making links to other texts. So that's our L, which is thinking about books by the same author, or perhaps a particular text type, or maybe you're reading a narrative and you want to complement that with some information from a non-fiction text that gives a bit more background knowledge. This obviously often will evolve through the week when you kind of see where the children go with their interests around the text and the questions that they ask. A third option is the C, which is linking reading more widely across the curriculum. And a lot of the texts that we would put together with schools often links the wider curriculum anyway. So it's a really good opportunity to develop that love appreciation of literature, but also to build knowledge and to develop that kind of guided book talk. It might be that you spend time in that week recommending to each other, having that kind of book blether or book talk that's so valuable. And A progressive approach means of meeting the needs of all of the learners, obviously, and by adapting our teaching techniques. So just popped in a slide here to remind ourselves about our techniques that we would really be recommending and support schools to use in class, which would be pre-teaching vocabulary, offering sentence stems and guided questions, paired reading with stronger peers or adults, and then building that background knowledge through wider experiences. And then to develop fluent readers to move even further, it's about that deeper questioning, comparative reading, and that higher order questioning, so that they can really challenge themselves to use their skills to a deeper level. And this kind of close reading as well is another way of doing that, where we take a step back from the longer narrative and examine the constituent parts of the text. So we read as the writer, and we really think deeply about what that text could mean. Another example here is about developing sort of strategic reading technique to encourage that deeper thinking. So these are not questions that we necessarily give the children, but discussion points, and they'd be modelled and led by the teacher. And we might reveal more of the text to think about what more, develop that metacognition again. What more would they need to find out? What do they need to clarify, and so on. So there's a lot of complicated elements to teaching reading, as we know, but we feel that our way of technique that is in place and the structure that goes alongside the reading gems has been proven to be really effective. And we would really advocate this exposure to ranges of texts and genres, and this technique does allow that, because you get a chance to experience lots and lots of different books and a variety of them, not just within your phases, but across the whole school. So we want the children to be involved in choosing the books. We want to make sure that staff know as well which types of books are the high quality texts that are really valuable to use, and that we're not just using stories, that we're using poems and lyrics, leaflets, non-fiction. It doesn't always have to be a book. But most importantly, for these sessions to work or effectively, we need to have that good staff knowledge. So we need to have teachers who are readers, and that's not always easy to achieve. We want the children to have that passion and enthusiasm for books that are both rich in language and experience. So we need to actively introduce children to that literature and encourage promoting books at every opportunity, books that we have teachers of good knowledge of, that we can ask other children to recommend, and that we have things in place in school to create that reading culture and that buzz and excitement about reading. And a well thought out structure behind this is really important. So creating links within year groups through using books that have that kind of association that will be complementary to each other and therefore enhance and build upon reading experience is really important. It's a really powerful way to help with immersive literacy and develop oracy and create that lifelong love of the magic of books. You could also think of it as in terms of the wider school. So with this diagram, it's essential that the selected texts engage pupils and spark interest, but children are more likely to become excited about the language if they have that enjoyment of readers. So if we think about, essential texts, what other texts have they done within the school that maybe complement this that you can refer back to? Have we got these links in place across the school when we're planning which books to use so that they link to other areas of the curriculum and perhaps wider extracurricular activities as well? And the diversity within the books, obviously it's talked about a lot at the moment, but it's so important that the books that are chosen and the texts that you use and the experiences that you give the children are related to their context and their life within their wider community. So just as we're coming to the end of this section, in terms of that cross-curricular implementation, The reading strategies aren't isolated to English lessons, but teaching them explicitly within the reading sessions is so vital to get that knowledge and experience. Then applying them across the curriculum is also really important, so that we see text being used within the wider foundation subjects. For example, using retrieval in science, perhaps with non-fiction texts. You might use inference and evaluation to analyse historical sources. And maths, you need to use that really detailed comprehension to analyse word problems. And to do this, it's a whole nother training session, but it's really important to encourage leaders to integrate reading into their lessons to ensure that teachers are putting text within their teaching units for each topic. That we have training resources in place for sort of embedding these techniques across subjects, that teachers are aware of how to read as a historian, how to read as a scientist, and so on, which is no easy feat. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Are still staff skilled in a variety of techniques to teach reading strategies? And what could you do to support staff development in this area? So as we move on to the last section, we're going to think about assessment and reviewing our practice to make sure that we have this long-lasting impact through the provision that we have in place. So I'm just going to touch on a bit of monitoring assessment, how we might use data, and a consistency in approach across the school, and how we support staff in their professional development and collaboration to be the best they can be. So obviously we have this progression where we are thinking about this, as we talked about before, the phonics foundation, and we know that thanks to Ofsted especially, we are very, very much secure in establishing fidelity to the phonics in our school. And then as we go up the school, we've got to make sure that there is that secure foundation in place to build upon before they get to the end of year 6. So that they are in a really good place to leave school and take those skills with them, to apply them to their learning in high school and beyond. So we want this higher level thinking. We need those critical engagement skills and analysis of texts. We need the fluency. We need them to be able to access different texts and increasing complexity. So in terms of evaluating if we've got this in place in our schools, it's really important to identify the strengths and areas needing improvement, and then thinking about how we might look at our findings from our evaluating, perhaps through classroom observations, pupil voice, some assessment data, perhaps feedback from staff through CPD and sort of maybe self-assessment, and identifying what support and practice might need to be adapted. Thinking about which teaching strategies work well, and what intervention we have, and if that is effective. So evaluating if we're meeting the demands of the reading curriculum. Then it would be a point where we are considering sort of looking at what data we might use. So obviously we have a range of assessment techniques. In EOFS, we have like the phonics screening data, we have perhaps comprehension checks, we have a lot of one-to-one reading. So the teacher has a lot of knowledge about the abilities of the children, and it's not just focused on formal assessment either. In Key Stage 2, it often is relied upon to assess children through written tests, reading comprehension questions. But it's really important to try and not be limited to just that we use like think aloud discussions, we assess how the children are using those metacognitive skills, that we're giving that variety of activities so that we can see how they interpret different strategies in different contexts. But we can look as well at the quality of any written responses they might do in those reading sessions. and perhaps you might have some fluency assessments that you're using alongside. So we want to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves and also limiting teacher knowledge and development by just focusing on formal assessment data. So obviously we need to use those regular assessments, but also implement self and peer assessment and how we use effective teacher feedback, and perhaps train teachers to be able to infer the reading skills that they know those children need through their own observations. So at One Ed we have a variety of resources to support this. So, for teachers who might need knowledge about what they're looking for in terms of assessment, we have literacy basic skills overview, for example, which looks at the development in reading, fluency, comprehension, and the technical skills of reading. And it's a point to consider whether our teachers explicitly teaching these reading strategies. Are children engaged when they're taking part in reading lessons? Do they have adaptive teaching practice being effectively used? And how well are they embedded across schools? So have we got that progression that follows on from one year to the next? And then perhaps thinking about the children, what strategies do they have? Do they have a way of understanding a text? Do they monitor their comprehension? What happens if they get to a word they don't know? And how confident are the children with their reading skills? But also, how confident are the teachers? Do they feel that they have that understanding that they need to teach teaching well? To teach reading well. We also might be using something more formal, which we have our One Ed reading assessment tracking grids, and this will be looking at the word reading and comprehension skills across the different year groups. But this would be something that we wouldn't advise to use for every child, that you might create sort of a spotlight pupils where you might track all the way through school, and they sort of represent your pupil ability groupings. And when you have fewer pupils to assess in a formal way, you can collect sort of videos or annotated work evidence to go alongside it, which is much more valuable. But having that sort of moderation and pupil tracking is vital. Submitting these sort of teacher observations, and this is something that we support schools with a lot, to make sure that we have this reading curriculum and development that gets teachers and schools back on track to make sure nobody slips through the net. Obviously, most importantly, and I haven't talked about this a lot today because it wasn't the focus, but fostering that reading culture across school is so important, and it's through the ways that you lead your reading curriculum. So, but also outside of that. So, do we have these book talk sessions? Are there book reading spaces and places so that they can be engaged with their reading? Do we have those reading role models? Are there competitions for reading, or supported reading for children who maybe don't get that support at home? Are we having as much as we can and trying to involve families and communities in a partnership to develop a love of reading? And then, in terms of implementing this well, let's make sure that we have this knowledge of how to develop reading for pleasure, as through CPD, that we do lots of celebrating of reading, like World Book Day, which is today, and inviting authors and storytellers. That is so inspirational. And for children to see the process of being an author, and actually you get lots of support. You're not going to, your first version isn't the finished version. It's really valuable for them to know that that's what their life is like as writers and readers. But making sure that we really incorporate all these elements of reading into the curriculum is really vital. So we have a One Education Reading Award, which you can. It's the only reading quality mark that supports schools with the development of the entire reading curriculum. So we look at all elements of reading for enjoyment, reading for meaning, and word reading skills from the beginning. And we would support your school to work towards the Bronze, Silver or Gold Award, promoting literacy and the pleasure of reading. And you would get the chance to join a network of partner schools and receive resources and training, as well as a dedicated consultant and support if you choose to have that. And it's just a really good way to base on your progression on what good practice looks like, because you have a set of statements that tells you what a good reading school is. And it would answer all of these questions. So are we catering for everyone? Do we have children who are enjoying and loving reading, but have those skills and strategies to be an effective reader alongside that? So I'm going to leave you with this last question. What would be your top 3 actions that you need to effectively implement reading teaching across the school? And hopefully that's not an overwhelming question, because we all have a huge long list of things we could be doing, but what's the most effective to do first and right now? So I want to say thank you for listening. This is my information, and we would be really happy to hear from you if you want to get in touch. If you've got any questions or reflections from the training, I'd love to hear them. And I'm always available, and perhaps we will get a chance to talk again on this platform. So thank you for listening.
Oh, wow. Alice, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. And I know a lot of you will have taken loads of notes then. So well done. Thank you so much, Alice, for helping us all today. I know all of our schools are going to be a little bit better for reading as a result of your time today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we'd love to have you back. So if you'd like to come back and talk about the school culture, we'd love you to come and chat. So please, if that's okay, we'd love you to come and see us, and we'll do a follow-up session. And as I said before, if you've got any questions and you want to pop them in the chat underneath this recording, or you want to contact Alice or myself directly, I'll put our details underneath so you can do that too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.